This is Imperial Loyalist Wolf, and welcome to the Wolf's Corner. When last I left you, the Maelstrom was on the verge of erupting into full-blown war, as the rulers of the Carthan sector rallied support among their people and sent pleas for aid from the Space Marines, while the Warders continued their eternal vigil of the raging warp storm. Now at last the storm will break. At the direct request of the Carthan satrap, elements of the Firehawks chapter of the Adeptus Astartes were sent to investigate the disappearance of Carthan shipping in the areas to the galactic south of the Golgothan Wastes, which bordered the northern reaches of the Maelstrom Zone. In the past, the Firehawks had used the vast orbital dockyards of the Carthan capital world of Sidon Ultra for resupply. The volatile nature of the Firehawks was widely known, and it is likely that this also figured into the Carthan satrap's reasoning in making her request. As these inquisitorial records show, it would not be long before her arrogance and folly would cost her and the wider Imperium dearly. Conducting search and destroy operations in the Golgothan Wastes, Knight Commander Stibor Lazarak of the Firehawks acquiesced to dispatching several starships into the northern Maelstrom Zone. One such vessel, the Red Harbinger, entered the Endymion cluster in 904 M41. This ancient region of space was under the stewardship of the Mantis Warriors chapter. When the Red Harbinger entered the Galen system, they were intercepted and surrounded by Mantis Warrior vessels. Ever fierce and proud, they were goaded by the Firehawks' refusal to allow them to board and threats of reprisal and opened fire, crippling the lone cruiser. In a single instance, the full-scale conflict between Space Marine chapters was ignited. The Mantis Warriors boarded and captured the Red Harbinger, but the engagement was brutal to the extreme as both sides took heavy casualties. Less than 20 Firehawks were captured alive, and none surrendered. But their struggles brought time for an astropathic message to be dispatched to their chapter, warning of their fate and who they had fought. Upon learning of the fate of the Red Harbinger, Chapter Master Lazarak and the rest of his brothers were furious, and withdrew their forces from the operations already underway. The entire chapter fleet deployed with the utmost haste to the Maelstrom Zone. Soon matters escalated upon the arrival of the Firehawks, as they were met at Galen by a task force consisting of Mantis Warriors and Astral Claws warships. In a tense standoff, the captives were eventually returned and both sides traded threats. The Firehawks finally withdrew to await the arrival of their full forces, and especially their massive mobile star fortress, the Raptorus Rex. The Firehawks chapter fleet rendezvoused in the Sagan system, and, aided by their Carthan allies, soon launched a series of probing attacks and reconnaissance missions towards the Badab sector and the Endymion cluster. By this act, they escalated tensions to the point that the situation was rapidly proving untenable. While the Carthan rulers and Firehawks made the first moves, the Warders were not as unprepared as they might have hoped. Not only were the tyrant of Badab and his allies battle-hardened and had the advantage of being intimately familiar with the territory of the Maelstrom Zone, they had also been preparing for war for years. In particular, the Mantis Warriors proved to be impossible to pin down due to the guerrilla tactics that they employed. Using the Carthans to distract the Astral Claws forces in the Badab sector on Sagan proper, the Firehawks struck the outer world of Iblis at the edge of the Endymion cluster, attacking civilian targets and burning great swaths of crops and land in order to antagonize the Mantis Warriors into fighting them in open battle. Unfortunately, this type of attack had been anticipated and planned for by the secessionists. The Mantis Warriors pinned the Firehawks in place on Iblis with their hit-and-run tactics. The secessionist fleet was able to draw the Firehawks' forces away from Sagan. A combined force of the Astral Claws and Lamenter's chapters soon descended upon the Sagan system and decisively overwhelmed the planetary defense forces and Carthan troops. Badly mauled, the stranded Firehawks and Carthan troops found themselves cut off from supply and behind enemy lines. This forced the Firehawks to withdraw from the Iblis system as they raked the surface of the planet one final time and successfully punched through the secessionist blockade that was attempting to pin them in. The Firehawks' Raptorus Rex claimed the life of the secessionist Maelstrom Squadron's only Mars-class battlecruiser, Sacred Tetrarch, when the warship's mighty Nova cannon proved unable to prevail against the formidable Star Fortress. Remember that a Nova cannon is intended to cripple battleships. but against a ship like Raptorus Rex, the secessionists might as well have been throwing data slates at them. A lull descended upon the region following these tumultuous events as the secessionists consolidated their gains and the Catharans retreated in disarray. Fitting, given how they had rushed into this without any real plan beyond punish the secessionists for perceived slights and refusal to keep paying them. Soon the Firehawks were forced into a long period of retreat to the Maelstrom Zone's fringes, which lasted until late 904 M41. This was natural, as the single chapter was completely outnumbered and outgunned. This situation remained until the Marines Errant chapter answered the call of the Firehawks for reinforcement. This chapter diverted a sizable force of 6 companies and a fleet of support vessels in order to aid their brother Astartes, although their precise motivations for doing so remain obscured. Not even these records I recovered from inquisitorial vaults revealed the motivations for the Marines Errant to join this conflict. But soon the Star-faring chapter quickly became bogged down protecting Imperial shipping along the Pale Stars region and the outlying Maelstrom Zone's colonies as the secessionists renewed their offensive. The Marines Errant split their forces in an effort to guard the convoys in transit from the incredibly frequent secessionist raids and attacks. Matters soon became more complicated when the Marines Errant were caught between the Firehawks' desire to destroy Huron's forces at any cost and the growing need to protect Imperial shipping and the outlying Carthago sector's colonies from the marauding secessionist forces. This difficulty was further complicated by a conflict of interest due to the ancient ties of loyalty and blood the Marines Errant had forged with the Lamenters chapter, which they had fought beside as recently as the Conth Crusade, but now faced each other as enemies. This led to incidents where the Marines Errant failed to try to do more than drive off the Lamenters' forces during raids, and in which both parties gave quarter to the other, raising the mutual ire of their respective allies. Towards the year's end, matters worsened as more star systems were drawn into the rapidly escalating war. The Firehawks and their Carthan allies continued to suffer heavy losses in battle. Soon, a dozen worlds had fallen in short order to secessionist control, succumbing to direct secessionist assault or by diplomatic submission to prevent a slaughter of civilians. By the end of 904 M41, worse developments for the Catharans and their allies appeared in the form of the notoriously grim and independent Executioners chapter. News had reached the Marines Errant that the Executioners had announced their intention to support the secessionist cause in payment of an ancient blood oath given by their chapter to the Astral Claws. The Executioners sent their mighty warship Night Hag with a full augmented company of Astartes to aid the secessionists as a vanguard before the rest of the chapter came to join the war. Now the Loyalists would have to contend with what they thought were 4 entire chapters of Space Marines. Desperate, Carthan satrap Tanit Koenig was forced to take drastic action as her own ties and supplications to the Procurator Generals of the Adeptus Terra were long overdue. Nearly bankrupted by their sector's losses in the war, and with their fleet anchorage at Sagan III now in the hands of the secessionists, the Carthan Imperial commanders mounted a final attempt to harvest the resources needed to meet their own Imperial ties from the nearby worlds of Viania and Chimera, before the secessionists could claim these worlds as their own. Naturally, the nobles could not pay the tithes, so they decided to steal them from somewhere and hope the bureaucrats did not notice. Unfortunately, the secessionist intelligence network had already gathered every detail of this supposedly secret convoy and laid a carefully prepared trap. They allowed the Carthan convoy to take on the vast amount of wealth awaiting them at Viana before they attacked it, as they were preparing to transit into the war. The secessionist forces, comprised mainly of elements from both the Astral Claws and Lamenter's chapter fleet, were led by Huron himself. The Carthan convoy was encircled and then taken one vessel at a time in a series of ferocious ship-to-ship boarding actions. Over 24 vessels were taken as secessionist prizes for almost no losses sustained by the attacking forces. Only through the brilliant leadership of Lieutenant Commander Anton Narvaez was the Marine Errant capital ship Star Jackal able to escape the tyrant of Badab's cunning trap, fighting its way clear while sustaining heavy damage. They might be traitors, but part of me has to applaud the tactical genius of Huron and how he turned the hubris of his enemies against them. But, more importantly, The damage sustained in this battle caused the Star Jackal and its brilliant commander to fall behind in the Marines errant's pursuit of the Mantis warriors to the world of Bellerophon's Fall. It would be there that many of the chapter's commanders and senior officers were to die. The Marines errant's chapter was drawn towards the industrial moon of Bellerophon's Fall by the Mantis warriors. The two chapters engaged in fierce combat, but the Mantis warriors managed to isolate and entrap the Marines errant's 1st and 3rd companies in the rust zones, destroying much of their command structure in a series of murderous surgical strikes. The Marines errants were decimated and forced to retreat in disarray. After the deadly battle, it fell to Lieutenant Commander Narvaez to mount a rescue mission, in which he succeeded in saving the besieged survivors in a daring counter-raid. In the aftermath of this tragedy, it would also fall to Narvaez to take the reins of leadership as the Marines errant's chapter's last surviving senior officer in the war. Anton Narvaez would later somehow manage to reform the Marines errant's contingent into an effective fighting force once more, although they returned as a mere shadow of their former strength. Yet again, a single Imperial officer's actions saved a force loyal to the God Emperor from the oblivion of history. To make matters worse for the Imperial loyalists, the Astral Claws fought the Firehawks back to the edge of the Golgothan wastes, focusing all their attention on eliminating the chapter altogether. The Astral Claws succeeded in inflicting serious casualties on the chapter, which could no longer be considered an effective fighting force. Facing bitter recrimination in light of this tragedy, the alliance between the Firehawks and the Marines errants all but collapsed. The secessionist forces would continue to make major advances throughout the rest of the year almost unopposed. The Maelstrom Zone now belonged almost wholly to Huron, the tyrant of Badab. And that is where we must end this broadcast, as I fear the Inquisition has traced my signal. When I find another safe place to transmit, I will show you how the High Lords of Terra changed the situation from a simple internal dispute to a full-scale civil war, and the consequences such a decision brought to the sector. This is Imperial Loyalist Wolf, and may the Emperor's light be with you.